to another Warhammer 40k 8th edition battle report. 1850 points, Chaos Demons of Khorne versus Tzeentch, which will be a combination of Chaos Demons of Tzeentch and Thousand Suns. This will be battle report number 4 within group 4. Overall, this will be battle report number 9. We will be playing the chapter approved Maelstrom of War mission Kill Confirmed today, and we will roll for a random map deployment. First, let's take a quick look at the board that the armies will be playing on today. And here's where the objectives have been placed, starting with objective marker 5 right here, objective marker 2, objective marker 4, objective marker 3, objective marker 6, and finally objective marker 1. And before we roll for which deployment map the armies will be playing on today, we need to roll to see how many command points the Tzeentch army will have. Since Kairos Fateweaver is their warlord, they get plus D3 command points. So 6 plus D3, getting an additional 3, because the symbol is a 6. Here's the 1 just for reference. And so the Tzeentch army will have 9 command points for this battle, versus the 7 from the Chaos Demons of Khorne. So now we will roll for which map they will be deploying on today. And here's the roll for the map, getting a 3, which is the map Search and Destroy. And so on a 1, 2, or 3, one of the armies will begin setting up in the close left quadrant, and the other army will deploy in the far right quadrant. On a 4, 5, or 6, one of the armies will deploy in the close right quadrant, and the other army will deploy in the far left quadrant. So here's that dice roll, getting a 2, so they will deploy in the close left quadrant and the far right quadrant. On a 1, 2, or 3, the armies will deploy in the quadrant that's closest to them, so Chaos Demons of Khorne into the close left and Tzeentch into the far right. On a 4, 5, or 6, they will deploy in the opposite quadrants. And here's that dice roll, getting a 4, so they will deploy in the opposite quadrants. And then on a 1, 2, or 3, Chaos Demons of Khorne will begin deploying first, and on a 4, 5, or 6, Tzeentch will begin deploying first. And here's the dice roll, getting a 5, and so Tzeentch will begin deploying first. We'll be back after the deployment. So now that the deployment is finished, let's take a quick look at where the models ended up on the table. Tzeentch began deploying first, and they did finish deploying first, so they will go first unless Chaos Demons of Khorne are able to seize the initiative. We have a squad of pink horrors right here, second squad of pink horrors right here. This squad, of course, has the demonic icon and the instrument, Soul Grinder of Tzeentch, Kairos Fateweaver. Third squad of pink horrors, Magnus the Red, Lord of Change with Baleful Sword and the Impossible Robe. And right here, partially hidden behind this building, is the second Soul Grinder of Tzeentch. And then over on the Chaos Demons of Khorne side, we have a squad of Bloodletters right here at the edge. This squad of Fleshhounds, Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, Skull Cannon number 1, Scarbrand, Skull Cannon number 2, second Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, Demon Prince of Khorne with Skull Reaver, second squad of Bloodletters, the third squad of Bloodletters, and the third Skull Cannon. So now we will roll to see if the Chaos Demons of Khorne are able to seize the initiative from Tzeentch. And here's the roll for seize the initiative, and they failed to do so. So let's go into Tzeentch turn 1. Going into Tzeentch turn 1, a reminder that Tzeentch has 9 command points, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 7 command points. At the beginning of the turn, Tzeentch needs to draw 3 tactical objective cards, and they draw Touched by the Warp. Score 1 victory point if you manifested or denied a psychic power during this turn. If you manifested or denied a psychic power with the Tzeentch demon unit during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. Scour the Skies, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy unit that can fly was destroyed during this turn. And the Dominion of Chaos, score D3 victory points if you control more objective markers than your opponent at the end of the turn. Going into the movement phase, this squad of pink horrors will remain still. This squad of pink horrors is going to move up the board towards objective marker 4, and they will also declare an advance. And here's the advance roll, getting a 4, and thanks to the instrument in the squad, they get to add 1 inch. So a 5-inch advance, meaning 11 inches of total movement. And this squad of pink horrors is going to end its movement here, and they are within 3 inches of the center of objective marker 4. Next, this Soul Grinder of Tzeentch is going to move 8 inches up the board, up this direction. And the Soul Grinder will finish its movement here. Magnus the Red is going to move 16 inches up the board towards the Chaos Demons of Khorne deployment zone. And Magnus is going to finish his movement right here. Kairos Fateweaver is going to move 12 inches up the board behind Magnus the Red. And Kairos will finish his movement right here. And now the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will also move up the board 12 inches behind Magnus the Red. And the Lord of Change will finish its movement right here. Now this Soul Grinder is going to move up the board 8 inches. And the Soul Grinder will finish its movement right here. Finally, this squad of pink horrors is going to move up the board 6 inches towards objective marker 6. And the pink horrors will finish their movement right here. Going into the psychic phase, we will start by using the stratagem Locus of Conjuration. Use the stratagem at the start of your psychic phase, select a Tzeentch demon character from your army. Until the end of the phase, you can reroll any failed psychic tests made for friendly Tzeentch demon units within 6 inches of that model. And the Tzeentch demon character that will be chosen as the subject will be the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword, which means the Magnus the Red himself, Kairos Fateweaver, and the pink horrors sitting on objective marker 6 will all benefit and be able to reroll failed psychic tests. Magnus the Red will be able to take advantage of this because he is a Tzeentch demon unit. And this will take Tzeentch from 9 command points down to 7. And so the first psychic test we will start with this pink horror squad, which will fire Smite onto this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, which is on the other side of Magnus and is the closest visible enemy unit. The pink horrors, of course, only roll 1 dice, and they get it with a 6, so it goes off. And the Fleshhounds, which are within 24 inches, will attempt to deny the witch. And they successfully deny the witch. So Magnus the Red is going to cast Smite onto Scarbrand, who is the closest visible enemy unit. He will cast Death Hex onto this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, and he will cast Diabolic Strength onto himself. So starting with Diabolic Strength, getting a 4, which will pass because of his psychic bonus of +2, which equals a 6, and Diabolic Strength has a warp charge value of 6. So until the start of the next Tzeentch psychic phase, Magnus has +2 to his strength characteristic and +1 to his attacks characteristic. Now for Death Hex onto the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, needing an 8, and he gets it with a 10. So until the start of the next Tzeentch psychic phase, the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage cannot take invulnerable saves. And now Smite onto Scarbrand, getting a 4, which becomes a 6, which will pass because of his warp charge value of 5. And thanks to his ability, the Gaze of Magnus, when Magnus the Red manifests the Smite power, he inflicts D6 mortal wounds instead of D3, or 2d6 mortal wounds instead of D6 if the result of the psychic test is more than 11. So we will get D6 mortal wounds here, and here's the roll, getting 6 mortal wounds. And so Scarbrand will go from 16 starting wounds down to 10. Next, Kairos Fateweaver is going to activate Gaze of Fate. He will cast Boon of Change onto Magnus, and he will cast Infernal Gateway onto Scarbrand. Starting with Gaze of Fate, which has a warp charge value of 6, and it passes. So now Tzeentch can reroll a single dice roll later during the turn. Now for Boon of Change onto Magnus, which has a warp charge value of 7, and it will go off because Kairos has a psychic test bonus of +2 since he's at full health. So it will go off with a 7. And so here's the D3 roll on the table for what he gets, and that will be a 1, which is extra limb, +1 attack. So thanks to Boon of Change, Magnus will have +1 attack. And he also has +1 attack from his own Diabolic Strength, so he actually has +2 attacks this turn. And Infernal Gateway actually goes onto the nearest enemy unit that's also visible, so it will go onto this Bloodthirster instead of Scarbrand. However, Scarbrand and the Fleshhounds are within 3 inches of that Bloodthirster, and so if it goes off, they will also take mortal wounds potentially. And so here's the Psychic test, and it has a warp charge value of 8, and so it will go off with a total of 9 after the Psychic test bonus. So D3 mortal wounds on the Bloodthirster, who is the target, and it will do 2 mortal wounds. D3 mortal wounds on Scarbrand, and that will do 2 mortal wounds. And D3 mortal wounds onto the Fleshhounds, and it will do 3 mortal wounds. And so the Bloodthirster will go from 16 starting wounds down to 14. Scarbrand is going to go from 10 wounds down to 8. And since the Fleshhounds took 3 mortal wounds, this one will be completely removed, and this Fleshhound will go from 2 wounds down to 1. There are no enemy units within 18 inches of this pink horror squad for them to cast Smite, and there are no enemy units within this pink horror squad for them to cast Smite. So finally, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword is going to cast Smite onto this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage on the far side because it is the closest visible enemy unit, base to base, and it will cast Treason of Tzeentch onto this wounded Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. So starting with Smite, and gets it with a 7, thanks to its Psychic test bonus. So D3 mortal wounds, and it will do 1 mortal wound. And so this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage will go from 16 starting wounds down to 15. And so now for Treason of Tzeentch, and gets it with a 14. And because he rolled double 6s, he will suffer Perils of the Warp. So D3 mortal wounds, and will suffer 2 mortal wounds. So the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will go from 16 starting wounds down to 14. But Treason of Tzeentch will go off, and so we roll 2 dice, and if it's higher than the leadership of the Bloodthirster, and he has a leadership of 10, then Tzeentch will control him for the remainder of this player turn. So looking for an 11 or a 12, and getting a 7. However, Tzeentch will use 1 command point, going from 7 down to 6 in order to re-roll the 1. And here's the re-roll, and still getting a 1, so they fail to control the Bloodthirster. So going into the shooting phase for Tzeentch turn 1, we will start with this Soul Grinder, and thanks to this wall from the ruin, he cannot see the Bloodthirster, which means that the Demon Prince of Khorne is the closest visible enemy unit, and so the Soul Grinder will fire everything it has into this Demon Prince. So starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit. Strength 7 versus Toughness 6 means a 3 to wound, and it fails to wound. Now D6 shots from the Phlegm Bombardment, getting 1 shot. Hitting on a 4, and it hits. Strength 8 means wounding on a 3, and it fails to wound. And now this Soul Grinder of Tzeentch is going to fire everything it has into these Fleshhounds. Starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s, and getting 1 hit. Strength 7 versus Toughness 4 means a 3 to wound, and fails to wound. D6 shots from the Phlegm Bombardment, and it gets 1 shot. Hitting on a 4, and it hits. Wounding on a 2, and it wounds. 5 up invulnerable save, which fails. And so the wounded Fleshhound will be killed off. And finally, 6 of the pink horrors are within range to shoot their coruscating flames into Scarbrand. 12 shots, hitting on 4s, and only getting 4 hits. Strength 3 versus Toughness 7 means 6s to wound, getting 1 wound. And a 3-up armor save, which passes. So going into the assault phase, for Tzeentch turn 1, there are 3 charges to declare. First will be Magnus declaring a multi-charge into Scarbrand as the primary target, and the brighter orange Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. The Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will declare a charge into the brighter orange Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, and Kairos Fateweaver will declare a charge into the darker orange Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. And so we will start with Magnus the Red's charge, which means we will start with Scarbrand's Overwatch from his Bellow of Endless Fury. So D6 shots from the Bellow of Endless Fury, getting 6 shots. This weapon automatically hits the target, so all 6 hit. Strength 5 versus Toughness 7 means 5s to wound and getting 3 wounds. Minus 1 AP, so 3 4-up invulnerable saves, and passes 2, failing 1. So Magnus the Red will go from 18 starting wounds down to 17. And now here's his charge distance. getting 6 inches, which will be enough to make it in since he was just over 3 away, and charging through the crater means he needed a 5-inch charge in order to make it. And so now Magnus will be in combat with both Skarbrand and the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. So now we will do the charge for Kairos Fateweaver into the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. He is 7.5 inches away, which means he needs 7 inches to make it in. And he fails with the 6. And so Tzeentch will use their 1 dice reroll, thanks to Gaze of Fate, in order to reroll the 2. And they pass with a 7. And so now Kairos Fateweaver will be in combat with this Bloodthirster. Finally, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will declare its charge into the other Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. And he is also 7.5 inches away, however he will be charging through a crater, which means he needs a 9-inch charge in order to make it in. And so here's the charge roll, and he gets it with an 11. And so this Lord of Change with Baleful Sword is now in combat with the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. So going into the fight phase, Magnus will have 10 attacks this turn. He has 7 attacks base, since he's at his highest tier on his damage chart. He has +1 attack for Diabolic Strength, +1 attack for Boon of Change, and +1 attack for being within 8 inches of Skarbrand, which gives him a grand total of 10 attacks. And so he will place 6 attacks onto Skarbrand, and 4 of those attacks onto the Bloodthirster that he's engaged with. Also, because of Diabolic Strength, his base strength of 8 goes up to a strength characteristic of 10, and the Blade of Magnus, which is ×2 strength, means he will have a strength of 20 during these attacks. So starting with the 6 attacks onto Skarbrand, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s thanks to himself, getting 1 reroll, and here's the reroll. Still failing to hit. Strength 20 versus Toughness 7 means 2s to wound, and only getting 3 wounds. These are -4 AP, so Skarbrand will have a 5-up invulnerable save, and he passes 2 of them. And so the Chaos Demons of Khorne are going to go from 7 command points down to 6 in order to re-roll the 1 and try to save all of those wounds. And so here's the re-roll, and it passes. So Magnus fails to do any wounds to Skarbrand. Now for the 4 attacks from Magnus onto the Bloodthirster, hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, getting 3 hits so far, and re-rolling the 1, which still fails to hit. Strength 20 versus Toughness 7 means 2s to wound, and all 3 wound. It is -4 AP, so the Bloodthirster will not have an armor save. And because the Bloodthirster was death hexed this turn, he will also not get to take invulnerable saves. And the Blade of Magnus is an automatic 3 wounds apiece, so the Bloodthirster will lose 9 wounds. And so this Bloodthirster will go from 15 wounds down to 6. The Chaos Demons of Khorne are now going to go from 6 command points down to 4 in order to use the stratagem Counteroffensive. This stratagem is used right after an enemy unit that charged has fought. Select one of your own eligible units and fight with it next. And so this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage is going to be the one to fight next, who will attack Kairos. And since the Bloodthirster has 14 wounds left, he still has 6 base attacks, +1 for being charged, and +1 for being within 8 inches of Skarbrand for a total of 8 attacks. And the Bloodthirster is going to use the Mighty Strike version of the Great Axe of Khorne, so 8 attacks onto Kairos Fateweaver, hitting on 2s, with 6s generating an additional hit. And unfortunately, Skarbrand's Warlord trait of Rage Incarnate reroll hit rolls of 1 for friendly Khorne demon units that charged this turn and are within 8 inches of your Warlord when they fight. That is only if they charged, not if they are charged, and so the 1s don't get to be rerolled. So 6 hits out of 8 attacks, but thanks to that 6, it generates an additional hit, so the Bloodthirster will get 7 hits out of 8 attacks. Strength 16 versus Toughness 7 means 2s to wound, and all 7 wound. 7 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 3, and fails 4. Tzeentch is going to use 1 command point, going from 6 down to 5 in order to re-roll one of those failed invuln saves. And here's the re-roll, which will pass. So only 3 go through. And these will do d6 damage apiece, rolling 2 dice, taking the highest. So strike number 1 will do 3 damage. Strike number 2 will do 6 damage. And strike number 3 will do 4 damage, for a total of 13 damage. And so Kairos Fateweaver is going to go from 16 starting wounds down to 3 left. So now the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword is going to try to finish off this Bloodthirster. So the Lord of Change has 5 attacks base, since it still has 14 wounds left, plus 1 attack for being within 8 inches of Scarbrand, for a total of 6 attacks hitting on 2s, getting 6 hits, using the Baleful Sword, of course. And because he's using the Baleful Sword, we have to subtract 1 from the hit roll, so he's actually only hitting on 3s instead of 2s, but all 6 still hit anyways. Strength 7, thanks to the Baleful Sword, versus Toughness 7, means 4s to wound and getting 4 wounds. Minus 3 AP, so the Bloodthirster will only have a 6-up armor save, and he passes 1, failing 3. And these will do d6 damage apiece, for a total of 16 damage. And with 10 wounds worth of overkill, that will remove the Bloodthirster for first blood. So now Kairos Fateweaver is going to attack back onto the Bloodthirster. Since Kairos Fateweaver is down to 3 wounds, he has 1 attack base, but plus 1 attack for being within 8 inches of Scarbrand. So 2 attacks total, hitting on 3s and getting 2 hits. Strength 8, thanks to the Staff of Tomorrow, his only close combat weapon, versus Toughness 7, means 3s to wound and getting 1 wound. The Bloodthirster will take a 5-up invulnerable save, which it will pass. So now that all of the charging units have gone, Scarbrand is going to attack back onto Magnus. And since Scarbrand is now down to 8 wounds, he has 7 attacks base, plus 1 for being charged, and plus 1 for being within 8 inches of himself. And he, of course, is going to use the Mighty Strike form of Slaughter and Carnage. So 9 attacks, hitting on 3s, re-rolling thanks to himself. Getting 5 hits so far, with a 6, which will generate an additional hit. And I should say re-rolling thanks to Slaughter and Carnage. So getting 2 more hits from the rolls, for 7 starting hits, plus 1 additional hit thanks to the 6, for a total of 8 hits out of 9 attacks. Strength 16 versus Toughness 7, wounding on 2s, and getting 8 wounds. 8 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 2 and fails 6 of them. And so these are going to do d6 damage apiece, and that's a lot of damage, with a total of 25 damage. And so Magnus, who is down to 17 wounds, is crushed and destroyed. And before I forget, the Lord of Change is going to consolidate a couple of inches, and now Scarbrand will consolidate a couple of inches. And here's where they ended up. And so now at the end of the fight phase, Khorne is going to use the stratagem Frenetic Bloodlust for 3 command points, which will take them from 4 down to 1 left. Use this stratagem at the end of any fight phase, select one of your Khorne demon units. That unit can immediately fight again. And so the Chaos Demons of Khorne are going to have this Bloodthirster fight again against Kairos Fateweaver. And so the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, once again, with 8 attacks, hitting on 2s, getting 1 miss but 5 additional hits? What? That's a lot of 6s. So after removing the 1, the Bloodthirster has 7 hits out of 8 attacks, but thanks to the 5 6s in the group, he actually has 12 hits out of 8 attacks, wounding on 2s, and getting 11 wounds. 11 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 3 and fails 8, and they do d6 damage apiece. So in the best case scenario for Kairos, he would only take 8 damage, which would already be more than enough to remove his final 3 wounds. So Kairos is killed off by a lot of overkill. And so Kairos Fateweaver, with his 3 remaining wounds, is removed. And so this Bloodthirster will consolidate a couple of inches. And so this means, of course, that Chaos Demons of Khorne have achieved Slay the Warlord for 1 victory point. And so now going into the morale phase, these Fleshhounds lost 2 models, but they are within 8 inches of Scarbrand, so they do not have to take a morale check. So at the end of Tzeentch turn 1, let's take a look at the tactical objective cards. Touched by the Warp, score 1 victory point if you manifested or denied a psychic power during this turn. If you manifested or denied a psychic power with a Tzeentch demon unit during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. And they did successfully manifest multiple psychic powers with Tzeentch demon units. So they will get D3 victory points for that, and they will get 2 victory points. Next is Scour the Skies, score 1 victory point if at least one enemy unit that can fly was destroyed during this turn. And they did successfully complete that because Bloodthirsters can fly. So 1 victory point for that. And finally, the Dominion of Chaos. Score D3 victory points if you control more objective markers than your opponent at the end of the turn. And they also completed that as they hold 3 objective markers. Each of the Pink Horror squads controls a separate objective marker, while the Chaos Demons of Khorne only hold the 1 objective marker that was in their starting deployment zone. So they do hold more than Khorne, which means they get D3 victory points. And here's the roll for that, just getting 1. But this does mean that Tzeentch managed to complete all 3 tactical objective cards this turn, so they will be able to draw 3 new ones in the next turn. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 1, thanks to achieving first blood from killing the Bloodthirster, Tzeentch is currently leading 5 victory points versus the 1 victory point that Khorne has, thanks to Slay the Warlord. Going into Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 1, a reminder that the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 1 command point left, and Tzeentch has 5 command points left. The Chaos Demons of Khorne need to draw 3 tactical objective cards at the beginning of their turn, and so they draw Advance, score 1 victory point if no unit from your army is within your deployment zone at the end of your turn. Overwhelming Firepower, secure 1 victory point if an enemy unit was destroyed during the shooting phase of your turn. If 3 or more enemy units were destroyed during the shooting phase of your turn, score D3 victory points instead. And finally, Secure Objective 3, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 3 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 3 is right here, back in this corner of the board, currently being held by a squad of Pink Horrors. So going into the movement phase, we will start with this squad of Fleshhounds, which is going to move up the board 10 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And here is their advance roll, getting 1 extra inch, for 11 inches of total movement. And the Fleshhounds will finish their movement right here. This squad of Bloodletters is going to move up the board this direction towards Objective Marker 2, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an extra 4 inches for 10 inches of total movement. And the Bloodletters will finish their movement right here. And they are currently within 3 inches of the middle of Objective Marker 2. This Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage is going to move 12 inches over to here. And it will finish its movement right here. All 3 Skull Cannons are going to remain still. Scarbrand is going to move up to 6 inches over in this direction, making sure to stay just over an inch away from the Lord of Change, but this way he will be closer to the Tzeentch deployment zone. And Scarbrand will finish his movement right here. This Demon Prince of Khorne is going to move up the board less than 12 inches in order to just reposition itself to be in better shape to charge this Lord of Change. And it will finish its movement here. This squad of Bloodletters is going to move up the board 6 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an extra 4 inches for 10 inches of total movement. And the Bloodletters will end their movement here. Finally, this squad of Bloodletters is going to move up the board 6 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting 1 extra inch for 7 inches of total movement. And they will finish their movement here. Going into the shooting phase for Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 1, we will start with this Skull Cannon, which is currently sitting on Objective Marker 5, and it will fire into that Soul Grinder over there. D6 shots, getting 4 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound. The Soul Grinder will take a 4-up invulnerable save, which it will pass. And then both of these Skull Cannons are going to fire into this squad of Pink Horrors. We will start with this Skull Cannon. So the Skull Cannon on Khorne's right will do D6 shots, doing 4 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 2s, getting 1 wound, 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. So 1 pink horror will go down so far, and then the second skull cannon, the skull cannon on Khorne's left, d6 shots, doing 1 shot, hitting on a 3, and fails to hit. And so 1 pink horror will be removed. And Skarbrand's Bellow of Endless Fury is too far away to hit the pink horrors, but it can hit the Lord of Change that he's next to. So, Skarbrand's Bellow of Endless Fury onto the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword, d6 shots, getting 2 shots. It automatically hits, so 2 hits, wounding on 5s, and getting a wound. The Lord of Change has the artifact, the Impossible Robe, so a 3-up invulnerable save, which it passes. Going into the assault phase, there are 3 charges to declare. First will be this Bloodthirster, charging the Soul Grinder. The second will be Skarbrand declaring a charge onto the Pink Horrors. And the third will be this Demon Prince of Khorne declaring a charge onto the Lord of Change. So we'll start with the Bloodthirster onto the Soul Grinder and start with Overwatch. 3 shots from the Harvester Cannon hitting on 6s, all failed to hit. Phlegm Bombardment, d6 shots, getting 2 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. -2 AP, so a 5-up invulnerable save, which passes. And here's the charge distance. 7 inches will be more than enough. And so this Bloodthirster will now be in combat with the Soul Grinder. So now Skarbrand charging into the Pink Horrors. All 9 Pink Horrors that are left alive in that squad are within 18-inch range for their Coruscating Flames to attack Skarbrand in Overwatch. So 18 shots, hitting on 6s, and getting 5 hits. Strength 3 versus Toughness 7 means 6s to wound, and getting 1 wound. A single 3-up armor save, which passes. And here's the charge distance for Skarbrand, getting 6 inches, which will not be enough. So Khorne will use their last command point, going from 1 down to 0, in order to re-roll that 1. And so here's the re-roll, getting only 7 inches of charge, which will not be enough. So that is a failed charge. And then finally, the Demon Prince of Khorne into the Lord of Change. There is no Overwatch, so here's the charge distance, 4 inches, which will be more than enough since he's just over an inch away. And so now the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword and the Demon Prince of Khorne with the Skull Reaver are locked in combat. And the first charging unit to attack will be the Bloodthirster attacking the Soul Grinder. And so the Bloodthirster has 6 attacks base, +1 for charging, and +1 for still being just within 8 inches of Skarbrand for a total of 8 attacks. And the Bloodthirster will use the Mighty Strike version of the Great Axe of Khorne, hitting on 2s, getting 8 hits, +1 additional hit thanks to the 6. For a total of 9 hits out of 8 attacks. Strength 16 on the charge versus Toughness 7 means 2s to wound, and getting 9 wounds. 9 4-up invulnerable saves. Passes 5 and fails 4. Tzeentch is going to use 1 command point, going from 5 down to 4 in order to re-roll the 2. And so here's the re-roll, which still fails. So 4 strikes will go through. Each strike is d6 damage apiece, rolling 2 dice, taking the highest for damage. So strike number 1 will do 6 damage. Strike number 2 will do 6 damage. Strike number 3 will also do 6 damage. And strike number 4 will do 2 damage. But that is a total of 20 damage, and Soul Grinders only have 14 starting wounds, so that Soul Grinder will blow up. And on a roll of a 6, it explodes, and it does not explode. And so this Soul Grinder is removed. And now the Bloodthirster will consolidate up to 3 inches closer to these Pink Horrors since he can see them around the building. And he'll finish his consolidation movement there. And so now Tzeentch will go from 4 command points down to 2 left in order to use the counter-offensive stratagem. This stratagem is used right after an enemy unit that charged is fought. Select one of your own eligible units and fight with it next. And so the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will attack next onto the Demon Prince of Khorne. Since the Lord of Change is within 8 inches of Skarbrand, he gets +1 attack for a total of 6 attacks. And he will be using the Baleful Sword. So 6 attacks, hitting on 3s. And hitting with 3, missing with 3. Strength 7 versus Toughness 6 means 3s to wound, and getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, and the Demon Prince of Khorne fails all 3. And these will do d6 damage apiece for a total of 15 damage. And so this Demon Prince of Khorne is killed off. And the Lord of Change will not consolidate because he's already just over an inch away from Scarbrand, and so he cannot really consolidate any closer. Going into the morale phase, this unit of Pink Horrors lost 1 model. However, they have a leadership of 7, which means it would be impossible for them to fail a morale test after only losing 1 model. So at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 1, the Chaos Demons of Khorne failed to achieve advance, they failed to achieve overwhelming firepower, and they failed to achieve secure objective 3. So no new victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne this turn, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne will choose to throw away advance. And so at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 1, the score currently sits at 1 victory point for the Chaos Demons of Khorne, and 5 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 2, a reminder that Tzeentch has 2 command points left, and the Chaos Demons of Khorne have 0 command points left. At the start of the turn, Tzeentch needs to draw 3 new tactical objective cards since they completed all 3 last turn, and they draw Psychological Warfare, score 1 victory point if your opponent failed a morale check during this turn. If your opponent failed 3 or more morale checks, score d3 victory points instead. They also drew Big Game Hunter, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy unit with a wounds characteristic of 10 or more was destroyed during this turn. If at least 1 enemy unit with a wounds characteristic of 20 or more was destroyed during this turn, score d3 victory points instead. And finally, Secure Objective 3. Score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 3 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 3 is this one right here. It's the same one that the Chaos Demons of Khorne drew that they needed to secure last turn, and it's currently being held by a squad of 10 Pink Horrors. Technically 9 Pink Horrors with 1 Iridescent Horror. So going into the movement phase, this Soul Grinder is going to come around the wall and walk up towards the Chaos Demons of Khorne deployment zone with its movement characteristic of 8 inches. And it will finish its movement right there. This squad of Pink Horrors on Objective Marker 3 will remain still. The Lord of Change with Baleful Sword is going to move up and around up to 12 inches over to this area. And the Lord of Change will finish its movement here, just over an inch away from both Scarbrand and the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, but slightly closer to Scarbrand for the purposes of targeting with Smite. This squad of Pink Horrors is going to move up to 6 inches up the board in order to better reposition itself around Objective Marker 4. And they will finish their movement like so. Finally, this squad of Pink Horrors is going to move up the board 6 inches to be closer to the Chaos Demons of Khorne. And they will all finish their movement right here, with the purpose in doing so being so that they are closest to Scarbrand for the purposes of targeting with Smite, and they can all see Scarbrand and the Bloodthirster. This squad of Pink Horrors is also within 6 inches of the Lord of Change now. So going into the Psychic phase for Tzeentch turn 2, Tzeentch is going to use their last 2 command points, going from 2 down to 0, in order to use the stratagem Locus of Conjuration. Use this stratagem at the start of your Psychic phase, select a Tzeentch demon character from your army, which will be the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword. Until the end of the phase, you can reroll any failed psychic tests made for friendly Tzeentch demon units within 6 inches of that model. And so obviously the Lord of Change will benefit from that, but so will the Pink Horrors. And so we will start with the Lord of Change casting Smite and Bolt of Change onto Scarbrand. So starting with Smite and getting it with an 8, which goes up to a 10 thanks to its psychic test bonus. So the Flesh Hounds within 24 inches will attempt to deny the Witch, and they do with an 11. Now Bolt of Change, which needs an 8 and will go off with a 12. So D3 mortal wounds, and it will do 3 mortal wounds. So Scarbrand will go from 8 wounds left down to 5. And so now the Pink Horrors will cast Smite onto Scarbrand. They only roll 1 dice, and they fail with a 4. However, thanks to Locus of Conjuration, they get to re-roll that. And here's the re-roll, and they still fail to get it off. Finally, this squad of Pink Horrors is going to cast Smite into the Flesh Hounds, looking for a 5 or a 6, and fails to get it. So now moving into the shooting phase, we will have the squad of 9 pink horrors, technically 8 pink horrors with 1 iridescent horror, shooting into Scarbrand. 18 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 11 hits. Strength 3 versus Toughness 7 means 6s to wound, and getting 1 wound. 1 3-up armor save, which passes with a 5. Next, this squad of pink horrors is going to shoot into the Fleshhounds, and all 10 models are within 18-inch range. 20 attacks, hitting on 4s, only getting 8 hits. Wounding on 5s, and getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, and fails all 3. So 1 Fleshhound will be removed, and a second will go down to 1 wound. Finally, this Soul Grinder is going to shoot everything it has at this skull cannon in the back, currently sitting on objective marker 5. 3 shots from the Harvester Cannon, hitting on 4s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 4s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up armor saves, passes 1 and fails 1. And the Harvester Cannon does D3 damage, so doing 2 damage. So this Skull Cannon will go from 7 starting wounds down to 5. And now for the Phlegm Bombardment, D6 shots, doing 1 shot. Hitting on a 4, and it hits. Wounding on a 3, and it fails to wound. Going into the Assault phase, there are 2 charges to declare. First will be the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword declaring a charge into Scarbrand. The second charge will be the Soul Grinder declaring a charge into this squad of Bloodletters. And there will be a third charge, which will be this squad of pink horrors declaring a charge into Scarbrand as well. Starting with the Lord of Change going into Scarbrand, we have Overwatch from the Bellow of Endless Fury, which will do 3 shots. It automatically hits, so 3 hits, wounding on 5s, and fails to wound. Charge distance, getting 7 inches, which is more than enough. And so now the Lord of Change is engaged with Scarbrand. So now we'll do the charge range for the pink horrors into Scarbrand, getting 3 inches, which will be enough to put them within an inch of Scarbrand. And here's where they ended up, and they will pile in once it's their turn to fight. And now the charge range from the Soul Grinder, getting 10 inches, which is more than enough. And so now this Soul Grinder will be locked in combat with those Bloodletters. And we will start in the fight phase with the Soul Grinder against the Bloodletters. So the Soul Grinder, which has full wounds, will have 5 attacks base, and it will use its Warp Swords that it gets to re-roll its any failed hit rolls. So 5 attacks, hitting on 4s, re-rolling the 1 and the 3. And here's the re-rolls. Still failing to hit. Wounding on 2s, getting 3 wounds. And 3 5-up invulnerable saves, passing 1, failing 2. And so 2 Bloodletters will go down. Now the Lord of Change is going to attack Scarbrand. 6 attacks with the Baleful Sword, thanks to being within 8 inches of Scarbrand. Hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 4s, getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up invulnerable saves, and passes both. And then after piling in, all of the pink horrors are either within an inch of Scarbrand or within an inch of someone who's within an inch of Scarbrand. And thanks to being within 8 inches of Scarbrand, the 8 pink horrors and the 1 iridescent horror have a total of 19 attacks, hitting on 4s, with 1 cocked dice so far, and re-rolling the cocked dice, getting a total of 12 hits, wounding on 6s, getting 1 6. 1 3-up armor save, which passes. So now that all of the charging units have attacked, the Chaos Demons of Khorne will strike back, starting with Scarbrand. Scarbrand, since he has 5 wounds left, has 7 attacks base, +1 for being charged, and +1 for being within 8 inches of himself, for a total of 9 attacks, and he will place all 9 attacks in Mighty Strike form from Slaughter and Carnage onto the Lord of Change. Hitting on 3s, re-rolling 1s and 2s thanks to Slaughter and Carnage. 8 hits, plus 1 additional hit thanks to the 6, and 1 re-roll. And so here's the re-roll, which gets a hit, and the 6 becomes an additional hit, so a total of 10 hits out of 9 attacks. Strength 16 versus Toughness 7 is 2s to wound, getting 7 wounds. 7 3-up invulnerable saves, passes 4, and fails 3. And the Lord of Change is going to use his ability from the Impossible Robe once per game to re-roll a failed saving roll. However, if this re-roll results in a 1, he is immediately slain. And he rolls a 1, and so the Lord of Change is immediately slain. So the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword, who had 14 wounds left, is immediately removed. And just for fun, even though he's already been removed, this is the damage that he would have received, which would have been 9. So he would have been left alive with 5 wounds left had he not re-rolled that. And now the Bloodletters will pile in 3 inches and attack back onto the Soul Grinder. And everyone will be in combat, so 8 Bloodletters attacking back onto the Soul Grinder. Thanks to being charged, 17 attacks total, hitting on 3s, getting a lot of misses, and only getting 7 hits out of 17 attacks. Strength 5, since they were charged, versus Toughness 7 means 5s to wound, and getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1. And so the Soul Grinder will go from 14 starting wounds down to 13. Going into the morale phase of Tzeentch turn 2, the Fleshhounds only lost 1 model, and since they have a leadership of 7, it would be impossible for them to fail a morale check. The Bloodletters, however, lost 2 models this turn, and therefore they could fail a morale check if they rolled a 6. And so here is their dice roll, and they get a 4, so they pass. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 2, they failed to achieve Psychological Warfare, they failed to achieve Big Game Hunter, they did manage to achieve Secure Objective 3, which is worth 1 victory point. And Tzeentch will throw Psychological Warfare away. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 2, the score currently sits at 6 victory points for Tzeentch and 1 victory point for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. Going into Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 2, a reminder that both Chaos Demons of Khorne and Tzeentch have 0 command points left. Also a reminder that Chaos Demons of Khorne held on to Overwhelming Firepower and Secure Objective 3 from the previous turn, so they will only draw 1 new tactical objective card. And the card that they draw is Domination. Score D3 plus 3 victory points if you control every objective marker on the battlefield at the end of your turn. Going into the movement phase, we will start by having these Fleshhounds move 10 inches up the board towards the Pink Horrors. And they will finish their movement right here, just over an inch away from the Pink Horrors. This squad of Bloodletters is now going to move up to 6 inches over in this direction to better hold objective marker 2. And they will end their movement right here. All 3 Skull Cannons will remain still. Scarbrand will remain locked in combat with the Pink Horrors. This Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage is going to move 12 inches up the board towards objective marker 3, and it will finish its movement right here. This squad of Bloodletters is going to fall back away from the Soul Grinder over in this direction up to 6 inches. And finally, this full squad of 10 Bloodletters is going to move 6 inches up the board towards the Soul Grinder. And here's where the Bloodletters will end up. Going into the shooting phase, all 3 Skull Cannons are going to fire into the Soul Grinder of Tzeentch. And so I'm just going to start going from right to left from Khorne's point of view. So the first Skull Cannon, which is also the wounded one, not that that matters for this, D6 shots, getting 5 shots, hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and passes both. Skull Cannon number 2, D6 shots, getting 3 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and passes both. Third and final Skull Cannon, D6 shots, getting 1 shot. Hitting on a 3, and it hits. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 4-up invulnerable save, which it fails. And D3 damage will do 3 damage. So the Soul Grinder will go from 13 remaining wounds down to 10. So then going into the assault phase, we have 2 charges to declare. The first of which is these Bloodletters will declare charge into the Soul Grinder, who will get to Overwatch. And secondly, the Fleshhounds will declare charge into the Pink Horrors, who will also get to Overwatch. Starting with the Overwatch from the Soul Grinder, Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 6s, all failed to hit. Phlegm Bombardment does D6 shots, getting 4 shots, needing 6s to hit, and fails to hit. Charge range for the Bloodletters, getting 4 inches, which is more than enough. Even with going through the crater, they were less than 3 inches away, so subtracting 2 from the charge roll of 4 inches means 2 inches is still enough to get them in. To save time, I did the 3-inch pile-inch move along with their charge, and because the crater is right there, causing them to all fall over whenever I tried to move them around, they're all just sort of there, but they all will be in combat. So now the Fleshhounds charging the Pink Horrors. There are still all 10 of them left, so 20 shots of Overwatch hitting on 6s. And getting a really good roll of 7 hits. Wounding on 5s. And getting 6 wounds. Wow. So 6 5-up invulnerable saves. And they fail all 6 of them. And so the wounded Fleshhound will go down. 2 fully healthy Fleshhounds will go down. And a 4th Fleshhound will be reduced to 1 wound left. And so now for their charge range, and because they are charging through a crater, a double 1 will not make it in. Anything else will. And they get 8 inches. And so they will now be locked in combat. And so we will start with the 2 Fleshhounds attacking the Pink Horrors. So the Fleshhounds onto the Pink Horrors, 3 attacks apiece since they charged, hitting on 3s, getting 5 hits. Strength 5 versus Toughness 3 means 3s to wound, and only getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and they pass both of them. So now we will do the Bloodletters attacks onto the Soul Grinder. 1 Blood Reaper and 9 Bloodletters on the charge means 21 attacks, hitting on 3s. Getting 16 hits out of 21 attacks. Wounding on 5s. Getting 5 wounds, with 2 of them doing double damage. So starting with the 2 that do double damage, 4-up invuln, passes 1, fails 1. And the 3 that do 1 damage, fails 2 and passes 1. So 4 damage will go through, which will reduce the Soul Grinder from 10 wounds down to 6. And so now that all of the charging units have gone, now we will go to the units that were already locked in combat. And since it's the Chaos Demons of Khorne turn, they will get to choose a unit first, but the only unit that they have that did not charge this turn is Skarbrand, so he will go next, onto the Pink Horrors. So Skarbrand, with 5 wounds left, has 7 attacks base, plus 1 for being within 8 inches of himself, for 8 attacks total. However, he will use the Sweeping Blow form of Slaughter and Carnage, which will allow him to make 2 hit rolls per base attack. So 16 attacks, hitting on 3s with no rerolls. Getting 12 hits. Getting 11 hits. But 6s generate additional hits, and of course getting 4 6s for 4 additional hits, which means he gets 15 hits out of 16 attacks. Strength 7 versus Toughness 3 means 2s to wound, and only getting 1 failed wound. So 14 wounds, 14 4-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 10 of them, failing 4. So 4 Pink Horrors will go down. And so now there are 5 left, including the 1 Iridescent Horror, and they will be the first Tzeentch unit to strike back. So the Pink Horrors, because they're within 8 inches of Skarbrand, will have 11 attacks back, hitting on 4s, getting lots of misses, and only getting 2 hits out of 11 attacks. Wounding on 6s, and getting a wound. 1 3-up armor save, and Skarbrand fails. So Skarbrand will go from 5 wounds left, down to 4. Now this squad of Pink Horrors will attack the Fleshhounds. They will also have only 11 attacks because they are not within 8 inches of Skarbrand. So 11 attacks, hitting on 4s. That's a decent number of hits. Getting 8 hits. Wounding on 5s, and getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, passing 1 and failing 2. And so the wounded Fleshhound is removed, and the healthy Fleshhound goes down to 1 wound. And these Pink Horrors would have piled in, so I will do that in just a moment, just to show that they all would have been in combat. And so then finally, the Soul Grinder will get to strike back against the Bloodletters. So since the Soul Grinder is down to 6 wounds, he only has 3 attacks base, and he will use all 3 in Warp Sword form, hitting on 4s, re-rolling, getting 2 hits, and 1 reroll, so all 3 hit. Wounding on 2s, getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, passing 2, failing 1. And so 1 bloodletter will be removed. So going into the morale phase for Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 2, the bloodletters only lost 1 model, and so it's impossible for them to fail a morale check. These pink horrors are within 8 inches of Skarbrand, and so they do not have to take morale tests. However, the unit of Fleshhounds will have to take a morale test because they lost 4 models. And the Fleshhounds have a leadership of 7, so they are looking for a 3 or less, and they fail with a 5. And so the final Fleshhound is removed, and that unit of Fleshhounds is wiped out. And so at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 2, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, they have not yet secured objective 3. They did not kill anything in the shooting phase, so they did not achieve overwhelming firepower, and they have not completed domination. And so at this point, because those Fleshhounds were wiped out, they will throw away domination. And so at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 2, the score still stands at 1 victory point for the Chaos Demons of Khorne and 6 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 3, a reminder that Tzeentch held on to Big Game Hunter from the previous turn, so they will draw only 2 new tactical objective cards this turn. And they draw Delight in Despair, score 1 victory point if your opponent failed a morale test during this turn. If an enemy unit failed a morale test during this turn, whilst within 3 inches of any of your Slaanesh demon units, score D3 victory points instead. And Master the Warp, score 1 victory point if you manifested or denied a psychic power during this turn. If you manifested or denied 3 or more psychic powers, score D3 victory points instead. Going into the movement phase, this squad of pink horrors will remain still. This squad of pink horrors will remain locked in combat with Skarbrand. This Soul Grinder is going to remain locked in combat with the Bloodletters. And this squad of pink horrors is going to move up the board up to 6 inches in order to better reposition to fire on this squad of Bloodletters. And they will end up right here, still holding on to objective marker 4. So going into the psychic phase, we will start with this squad of pink horrors, which has all 10 models still alive, firing Smite into these Bloodletters, needing at least a 5 and fails with a 3. So now this squad, locked in combat with Skarbrand, will attempt to manifest Smite in order to shoot Skarbrand. Looking for a 5 or 6, and gets it with a 6. So it will go off, and the Fleshhounds are no longer alive, so they cannot deny it. And it will only do 1 mortal wound, since they have less than 10 models. And so Skarbrand will go from 4 wounds remaining down to 3. And finally, this squad of pink horrors is going to attempt to cast Smite onto that Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage. And they are looking for a 5 or 6, and they fail to get it. Going into the shooting phase, we will start with this squad of pink horrors. Every model is within 18 inches of these Bloodletters. 20 shots hitting on 4s with 1 cocked dice, and rerolling the cocked dice, which of course gets a miss. Getting 10 hits out of 20 attacks. Wounding on 4s, getting 5 wounds, 5 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 2 and fail 3. And so 3 Bloodletters will go down. And now these pink horrors will shoot into the Bloodthirster. Once again, 20 attacks hitting on 4s, and getting 15 hits. However, this time only wounding on 6s, and getting 1 6. 1 3-up armor save, which passes. Going into the assault phase, there are no charges to declare, so we will begin in the fight phase with the 4 pink horrors and 1 iridescent horror attacking Skarbrand. Thanks to being within 8 inches of Skarbrand, they have 11 attacks, hitting on 4s, getting 7 hits. Wounding on 6s, getting 2 6s. 2 3-up armor saves, passes 1 and fails 1. So Skarbrand's going to go from 3 wounds left down to 2. Now the Bloodletters will get to strike against the Soul Grinder. The Bloodletters will have 10 attacks total, thanks to an extra one from the Blood Reaper, since they did not charge and were not charged this turn. So 10 attacks hitting on 3s, getting 5 hits, wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound, and the 1 wound will do double damage if it goes through, so 1 4-up invulnerable save, which saves. And so now the Soul Grinder will attack back onto the Bloodletters, using its Warp Sword, 3 attacks, hitting on 4s, re-rolling, getting 1 re-roll, and all 3 hit, wounding on 2s, getting 2 wounds, 2 5-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1. And so 1 regular Bloodletter will go down. And so finally, Scarbrand, with his 2 remaining wounds, will strike back against the Pink Horrors. He has 8 attacks base, since he's between 1 and 4 wounds, plus 1 for being within 8 inches of himself for 9 attacks total. However, he is now down to a weapon skill of only 4-up, so he will use the Mighty Strike form of Slaughter and Carnage in order to re-roll failed hit rolls. So 9 attacks, hitting on 4s, re-rolling misses, and a good thing for that because he only hit with 3. And here's the re-rolls, getting 2 more hits, but in total, getting 3 6s, which means 3 additional hits. And so he gets 8 hits out of 9 attacks. Wounding on 2s, getting 8 wounds, 8 4-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 6 of them, only failing 2. Which means only 2 more Pink Horrors go down, and Scarbrand will be locked in combat with them for at least 1 more fight phase, unless he chooses to back out. And so going into the morale phase, these guys cannot fail a morale check because they're within 8 inches of Scarbrand, so they do not have to take a morale check. This squad of Bloodletters only lost 1 model, and so they cannot fail a morale check as they have a leadership of 7. And finally, for this squad of Bloodletters, which did lose 3 models, however, this model right here is just within 8 inches of Scarbrand on the other side of that wall, and so because of that, they do not have to take a morale check. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 3, Tzeentch did complete Master the Warp, score 1 victory point if you manifested or denied a psychic power during this turn. If you manifested or denied 3 or more psychic powers, score D3 victory points instead. And they only manifested 1, so they get 1 victory point for that. They did not complete Delight in Despair, and they have not yet completed Big Game Hunter. And they will throw away Delight in Despair. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 3, the score currently sits at 7 victory points for Tzeentch and 1 victory point for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. Going into Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 3, they are still holding on to Overwhelming Firepower and Secure Objective 3 from the previous turn. And so they draw only 1 new tactical objective card, which is Secure Objective 5. Score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 5 is this one right here, currently being held by this Skull Cannon. So going into the movement phase, all 3 Skull Cannons will remain still. Scarbrand, with his 2 remaining wounds, will remain locked in combat with the Pink Horrors. This squad of Bloodletters is going to move up the board 6 inches, and they will finish their movement right here. This Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage is going to move up the board up to 12 inches to be within an inch, or to be just over an inch away from the Pink Horrors. And the Bloodthirster will finish its movement here just over an inch away. This squad of Bloodletters, currently engaged with the Soul Grinder, is going to fall back up to 6 inches. And so that squad of Bloodletters has fallen back to here, and they are now out of combat. This squad of Bloodletters is now going to move up and around the wall 6 inches to be just over an inch away from the Soul Grinder. And they will finish their movement here, just over an inch away from the Soul Grinder. Going into the shooting phase, we will start with the Wounded Skull Cannon sitting on Objective Marker 5, who will fire into the Soul Grinder. D6 shots, getting 4 shots, hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1, and this will do D3 damage, and it will do 1 damage. So the Soul Grinder will go from 6 wounds down to 5. Now this Skull Cannon, the one that's slightly closer, will fire into the Soul Grinder. D6 shots, 4 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and fails both. 2 D3 damage, and it will do 4 damage. So the Soul Grinder will now go from 5 wounds down to 1. And now the final Skull Cannon will fire into the Soul Grinder. D6 shots, getting 6 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 4 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 4 wounds. 4 4-up invulnerable saves, fails 2, and passes 2. And the 2 that go through do D3 damage apiece. Not that it matters, but they do a total of 5 damage, of course. So 4 points of overkill, and the final wound on this Soul Grinder is removed, and so the Soul Grinder is killed. So going into the assault phase, we have 2 charges to declare. The first is this Bloodthirster onto this squad of 10 pink horrors. And the second charge to declare is this squad of Bloodletters declaring a charge onto this squad of 10 pink horrors. So we will do the Bloodletters into the pink horrors first, and so we will resolve their overwatch. 20 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 4s, getting 1 wound. 1 5-up invulnerable save, which passes. And then the charge range for the Bloodletters, getting 7 inches. And that will be enough since they don't need to charge through a crater to get to the pink horrors. And so they will all be locked in combat. And so now the overwatch from the pink horrors into the Bloodthirster, 20 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 3 hits as well. Wounding on 6s, and failing to wound. And here's the charge distance, 3 inches, which is more than enough considering the Bloodthirster's only just over an inch away. And so the Bloodthirster makes it into combat. Going into the fight phase, for Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 3, we will start with this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage and its attacks onto the pink horrors. Since the Bloodthirster has 14 wounds left, it has 6 attacks base, plus 1 attack characteristic for charging this turn, for a total of 7 attacks. And the Bloodthirster will use the Sweeping Blow form of its Great Axe of Khorne, so it gets to make 2 hit rolls instead of 1 for each attack. So 14 attacks, hitting on 2s, and only missing 1 for 13 hits, but getting 2 6s, which generate an additional hit apiece, so a total of 15 hits out of 14 attacks. Wounding on 2s, and getting 14 wounds. 14 4-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 5 and fail 9. And so all 9 regular pink horrors are removed, leaving just the iridescent horror with its leadership of 7. And so now the Bloodletters will attack since they are the only other charging unit, and there are 6 regular Bloodletters and 1 Blood Reaper. So 15 attacks total, hitting on 3s, getting lots of misses, getting 9 hits out of 15 attacks. Strength 5 versus Toughness 3 means 3s to wound, and only getting 3 wounds. 3 4-up invulnerable saves, and they pass all 3. Wow, that squad of pink horrors does not want to die today. And so now going into units that did not charge this turn, we will start with Scarbrand attacking those 2 pink horrors and the 1 iridescent horror. Since Scarbrand's down to 2 wounds, he has 8 attacks base, plus 1 for being within 8 inches of himself, and he's going to use the Mighty Strike form of Slaughter and Carnage. So 9 attacks, hitting on 4s, re-rolling failed hit rolls, getting 6 hits so far, and the 3 re-rolls, getting 2 more hits, but no additional hits thanks to 6s, so only 8 hits out of 9 attacks. Strength 14 versus Toughness 3 is 2s to wound, getting 7 wounds. 7 4-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 5 of them! They only fail 2, which means they survive! What? What? No way! And so the 2 regular pink horrors are removed, but that means the iridescent horror will still be alive. And so now we're going to do this iridescent horror onto Scarbrand. 3 attacks since he's within 8 inches of Scarbrand. Hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 6s, and fails to wound. And now this iridescent horror, attacking the Bloodthirster. Only 2 attacks. Hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 6s, and fails to wound. And so now these pink horrors will pile in, and they will all be in combat. 11 attacks, hitting on 4s, getting 7 hits. Wounding on 4s, getting 4 wounds. 4 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 3 of them. And so 1 Bloodletter will go down. So going into the morale phase, this squad of Bloodletters only lost 1 model, and therefore cannot fail a morale test. This squad of pink horrors lost 9 models, which means it is impossible for them to pass a morale test. And so this iridescent horror will be removed, thanks to a failed morale test, since it is impossible for them to pass it. And that Bloodthirster will not consolidate because it is just within 3 inches of the center of objective marker 3, right where it's at. And finally, this iridescent horror does not have to take a morale test because he's within 8 inches of Scarbrand. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards for the Chaos Demons of Khorne, they did secure Objective 5 thanks to a Skull Cannon. They did complete Overwhelming Firepower for killing that Soul Grinder. And that Bloodthirster is holding Secure Objective 3 since he killed off that entire squad. So they get 3 victory points this turn. And so now at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 3, which is also the end of game turn 3, the score currently sits at 4 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne and 7 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 4, they are still holding on to Big Game Hunter from the previous turn, and this means they needed to draw 2 new tactical objective cards since they drew Witch Hunter, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy Psyker was destroyed during this turn, and that is impossible to achieve, and Advance, score 1 victory point if no unit from your army is within your deployment zone at the end of your turn. That already has been completed pretty much. So going into the movement phase, this squad of pink horrors will remain locked in combat with the Bloodletters, and this iridescent horror will remain locked in combat with Scarbrand. And so going into the psychic phase, we're going to start with the iridescent horror locked in combat with Scarbrand. He will attempt to manifest Smite, looking for a 5 or 6, and fails with a 4. And now this squad of pink horrors will attempt to cast Smite onto those Bloodletters, looking for a 5 or 6, and failing with a 1. Going into the shooting phase, there are no unengaged units on the Tzeentch side, so they will not be able to shoot anything since they have no pistol weapons. And since everyone's already engaged, there will be no charges declared in the assault phase. So going into the fight phase, as much fun as it would be to see if that iridescent horror can finish off Scarbrand with 3 attacks thanks to Scarbrand, in the interest of preservation for Tzeentch, this squad of pink horrors is going to go first against the Bloodletters. 11 attacks, hitting on 4s, getting 7 hits, and actually only getting 6 hits because I misread one of the 3s. So 6 hits, wounding on 4s, getting 4 wounds, 4 5 up invulnerable saves, passing 2, failing 2. And so 2 regular Bloodletters will go down. So now Scarbrand is going to attempt to finish off that lone iridescent horror. 9 attacks using Mighty Strike, hitting on 4s, re-rolling misses, and getting 6 hits so far, with 4 of them being 6s. And so the 3 re-rolls, getting 2 more hits. So getting 8 hits out of 9 attacks, but thanks to the 4 6s that were rolled, which generated an additional hit apiece, means 12 hits out of 9 attacks. Wounding on 2s, getting 4 1s. 8 4 up invulnerable saves. Can he pass all 8? And he fails 3. And so sadly, this final iridescent horror is brought down. And Scarbrand will now consolidate up to 3 inches towards the closest visible enemy unit, which is that final squad of pink horrors. And so the last thing to fight in this fight phase will be the 3 Bloodletters and the 1 Blood Reaper onto the pink horrors. 5 attacks total, hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound, and it will do double damage, not that that matters against pink horrors. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. And so 1 pink horror will go down. And so now going into the morale phase, because all the fighting is done, the pink horrors lost 1 model, but have a leadership of 7, so it's impossible for them to fail a morale check. However, the Bloodletters did lose 2 models this turn, and so they will have to take a morale check. And if they roll a 6, 1 more model is removed, and they do not roll a 6. So at the end of Tzeentch turn 4, they have not completed Big Game Hunter, they have not completed Witch Hunter, but they do not have any units within their own deployment zones. They get 1 victory point for that. And they will throw away Witch Hunter, since Khorne has no Psykers. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 4, the The score currently sits at 8 victory points for Tzeentch and 4 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. Going into the Chaos Demons of Khorne, turn 4, they did complete all 3 of their objective cards last turn, so they need to draw 3 brand new ones. And so they draw Witch Hunter, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy Psyker was destroyed during the turn. Defend Objective 5, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. And Objective Marker 5 is this one right here, currently being held by a Skull Cannon. And finally, defend Objective 2, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 2 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. And Objective Marker 2 is this one right here, nearby to where Skarbrand finished off that Lone Iridescent Horror. Going into the movement phase, these bloodletters are going to fall back 6 inches away from the pink horrors. And so the bloodletters will fall back to here. Skarbrand is going to move 4 inches up the board towards Objective Marker 2, and he will also declare an advance. And here's the advance roll for Skarbrand, getting an additional 4 inches. And so now with his 8 inches of total movement, Skarbrand is within 3 inches of the center of Objective Marker 2. All 3 Skull Cannons will remain still. Both of these Bloodletter squads will remain still, since there's not much left that they can do this game. And then finally, this Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage is going to move 12 inches towards the camera, and it will finish its movement right there. Going into the shooting phase, all 3 Skull Cannons are going to fire into the final Pink Horror squad. We will start with the wounded one in the back, then move to this one, which is in the middle, and then this one, which is closest. So the wounded one that's furthest away, D6 shots, getting 6 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 4 hits. Wounding on 2s, getting 3 wounds. 3 4-up invulnerable saves, failing 2. And so 2 pink horrors will go down. Now the Skull Cannon in the middle, D6 shots, getting 2 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 2, and fails to wound. And finally, the closest Skull Cannon, D6 shots, getting 2 shots. Hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 2s, getting 1 wound. 1 4-up invulnerable save, and passes. Going into the assault phase, there is 1 charge to declare, which will be the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, declaring a charge into the pink horrors. The Bloodthirster is 10.5 inches away, which means it needs a 10-inch charge. And thanks to the ruin that's partially in between, only 4 of the pink horrors can see for Overwatch. 8 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 6, and it wounds. 1 3-up armor save, which passes. And so now the charge distance, and fails with the 7. Going into the morale phase, these pink horrors did lose 2 models, which means they could fail a morale check if they rolled a 6. And here's their morale check, and they pass. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards, thanks to that pink horror squad surviving, they did not complete Witch Hunter. The Chaos Demons of Khorne are 1 turn into defending Objective 5, and they are 1 turn into defending Objective 2. So they will hold on to all 3 tactical objective cards. And so at the end of Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 4, which is also the end of game turn 4, the score currently sits at 4 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne, and 8 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 5, possibly their last turn of the game. They are still holding on to Big Game Hunter from the turn before. And the 2 new tactical objective cards that they draw are No Prisoners, score 1 victory point if an enemy unit was destroyed during your turn. If between 3 and 5 enemy units were destroyed during your turn, score D3 victory points instead. And if 6 or more enemy units were destroyed during your turn, score D3 plus 3 victory points instead. And Area Denial, score 1 victory point if there are no enemy models within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield at the end of your turn. If there are no enemy models within 12 inches of the center of the battlefield at the end of your turn, score D3 victory points instead. Going into the movement phase, this squad of 7 pink horrors, 6 pink horrors plus 1 iridescent horror, the last Tzeentch unit on the board is going to move up the board 6 inches towards these bloodletters. And they will finish their movement here just over an inch away from these bloodletters. So going into the psychic phase, these pink horrors are going to attempt to cast Smite into these bloodletters. And they are looking for a 5 or a 6. And they get the 6. And there are no Fleshhounds with the Collar of Khorne anymore, and so 1 bloodletter is removed. Moving into the shooting phase, the pink horrors are going to shoot their coruscating flames into Skarbrand. 14 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 6 hits, wounding on 6s, and failing to wound. So now going into the assault phase, the pink horrors will declare charge onto the bloodletters. No overwatch, so here's their charge range, getting 7 inches. And so the pink horrors will finish their charge here. 8 attacks, hitting on 4s, getting 5 hits, wounding on 4s, getting 3 wounds, 3 5-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 2 of them. So 1 more bloodletter will go down. 5 attacks from the 1 Blood Reaper and the 1 Bloodletter, hitting on 3s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 3, and failing to wound. Going into the morale phase, these bloodletters did lose 2 models, and so they will have to take a morale check since they are over 8 inches away from Skarbrand. On a 6, they lose 1 more model, and they pass the morale check. So, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, they did not complete Big Game Hunter, they did not complete No Prisoners, but they did complete Area Denial because there are no Chaos Demons of Khorne units within 6 inches of the center of the board. However, Skarbrand is within 12, so they do not get D3 victory points for that, but they will get 1 victory point. And Tzeentch will hold on to Big Game Hunter and No Prisoners, because at this point, it probably won't matter if they throw 1 away. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 5, the score currently sits at 9 victory points for Tzeentch and 4 victory points for the Chaos Demons of Khorne. And so before we go into Chaos Demons of Khorne turn 5, Tzeentch is going to decide to concede the game. Since they are so close to being tabled with just 1 unit of 7 pink horrors left on the table, and a Bloodthirster and Skarbrand so close by and within charge distance, at this point it would only be bad for Tzeentch to continue playing. So they will concede at this point, and this means of course that the game is then over, which means that this Bloodthirster right here, which is half in the Tzeentch deployment zone and half not in the Tzeentch deployment zone, is technically holding Linebreaker, since the rules for holding Linebreakers just have 1 model within the deployment zone, not wholly within. And so with Linebreaker, Chaos Demons of Khorne have 5 victory points, and of course Tzeentch has 9 victory points. But because this is the mission, kill confirmed, we also add in 1 victory point for each full enemy unit that was killed off during the game. And there were 3 units on the Khorne side that were fully killed off. 1 of the Bloodthirsters, the Demon Prince of Khorne, and of course the unit of Fleshhounds, which brings Tzeentch up to a total of 12 victory points, once we add in the 3 for the 3 killed units. And Khorne managed to kill off 7 full Tzeentch units: Magnus the Red, Kairos Fateweaver, Lord of Change with Baleful Sword, both Soul Grinders, and 2 full squads of pink horrors were killed off, which means Chaos Demons of Khorne also have a total of 12 victory points. So Khorne wins the game thanks to a concession from Tzeentch, but the score in terms of victory points is actually tied 12-12. So now that the game is over, halfway through turn 5, with the concession from Tzeentch giving Chaos Demons of Khorne a major victory, I can go over a couple of my final thoughts on the game. First of which, of course, partially went over the reason for Tzeentch conceding the game at this point. They were very close to being tabled with just 1 partial squad of pink horrors left, and so most likely they would have been tabled this turn, which of course would result in a victory for Khorne anyways, and so at this point they might as well end the game and not suffer anymore. The other reason, of course, is by conceding the game at this point and not letting Khorne finish their turn means that Khorne would not be able to achieve their tactical objective cards, which means, of course, then that the score is tied in terms of victory points at 12 apiece, so that this way the spread doesn't go against Tzeentch overall within the group, because of course Skarbrand and the Skull Cannons could sit and hold their objective markers, which would be a guaranteed 4 victory points, and then of course if Tzeentch is tabled, that means their unit of pink horrors is killed off, and so Khorne would achieve killing a Psyker, which would complete the tactical objective card Witch Hunter, which would give them an additional victory point. So then Chaos Demons of Khorne would have 5 more victory points than Tzeentch. And of course, then that would also give them 1 more destroyed unit. So it would actually give them 6 more victory points. So at the end of the game, at the end of turn 5, Tzeentch would be tabled and Khorne would win 18 victory points to 12. So this way they can lose the game but keep the victory points tied, which won't really matter because the only thing that really matters at the end of the day is the number of games won versus the number of games lost, and not necessarily the number of victory points achieved. But since they were going to lose anyways, might as well lose with at least a little bit of dignity. Overall, it was a fairly close game. It was very fun to play from my end. That one iridescent horror staying in combat with Scarbrand, and that pink horror squad in general, just, chipping away at Scarbrand 1 wound at a time. 1 wound here, 1 wound there, trying to kill him off and achieve Big Game Hunter and slay the Warlord. And they just, in the end, they couldn't do it, but they held in there for a lot longer than I really expected them to do so. And of course, that's another reason why Tzeentch conceded here. Had Tzeentch been more successful in their turn 5, my hope was that between Smite and Close Combat, they would kill off that unit of Bloodletters, which now only has 1 Blood Reaper and 1 Bloodletter left, which would of course give them an additional victory point for killing a unit. And then of course I was really hoping that with their shooting attacks they would kill off the final 2 wounds on Scarbrand, which would not only get an additional victory point for killing that unit, but would also give them Big Game Hunter and slay the Warlord, which would be huge in terms of victory points. Plus, killing 1 or both of those units would also help them achieve no prisoners, and so they could have gotten between 3 and 5 victory points this turn. Actually, between 5 and 7 victory points this turn had they killed off those 2 units. And then potentially, if the Bloodthirster fails its charge or is unsuccessful at killing off the pink horrors, it's entirely possible that the game ends at the end of turn 5 with a couple pink horrors left alive and Tzeentch wins the game because they have more victory points. Because of course if Scarbrand gets killed off, then they don't get the victory points for defending Objective 2, and if those pink horrors survive, they don't get the victory point for Witch Hunter, they don't get the victory point for killing off those pink horrors. It could have been a big swing, but since both Scarbrand and the squad of Bloodletters survived, that took away the ability to achieve extra victory points, and the likelihood that those pink horrors were going to survive was pretty much next to nothing at this point. Because between the Bloodthirster and Scarbrand, all that Khorne has to do is kill off those pink horrors and they table Tzeentch, and it doesn't even matter what the victory points are. Khorne automatically wins the game if Tzeentch is tabled, and so Tzeentch could even end up with more victory points and they still lose the game thanks to being tabled, which would be very interesting to see. And in fact, if that Bloodthirster wasn't right where he was and able to get Linebreaker with only half of his base in the deployment zone, Khorne would have lost in terms of victory points. 11 victory points to 12, yet they still would have won the game thanks to a concession. But overall, I thought it was a good game. I thought it was a close game. It was fairly interesting to play. So once again, end of the game, a Khorne major victory thanks to a concession, but the victory points are tied at 12 apiece. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next one.